I will come in via my phone just in case, just to make sure everything is set up. All right then. Hello, and welcome once again. The point of this presentation is to talk about the science of Kirtan. All right. So let's do this like this. All right. So now, what are the contents of what are we going to be doing now? So first, we're going to have a little bit of a history lesson about where Tantric yoga was overall in terms of time and how it was implemented, especially the singing part. We then look into the scope of interest in terms of vibration technology and medical application in the scientific field. We then look into some core principles that you need to understand in order to get into what this presentation is about, aka a small lesson in good vibrations. Then we have the main body, which is some of the active medical therapies that are currently available on the market. And there are some very important yogic traditions that are analogous to those medical fields. That part is particularly important because depending on how well you understand how vibrations work, the yogic part will then resonate with you. And finally, in the conclusion, I have a bit of a short explanation as to what is probably the best approach to handle everything else, and obviously the sources by the end. I was originally planning to introduce a practical lesson part, but I figured that we wouldn't have time. And since I'm still a big novice when it comes to tantric stuff, I decided to stick to the science stuff more. But that will change over time. So, so let's begin. Now, unfortunately for you, Nirmal, this is not going to be any major news, but for me, this was a very interesting little insight into the history of where all of this came from. So basically, this is the very beginning. Essentially, we are 800 before Christ or before the Common Era, and a lot of the core origins of Tantric yoga come from a very similar area than, for instance, some of the indigenous people here in America. If you are not aware, indigenous people of America have a lot of chants that are very similar to what you can see in Tantric yoga, which was mostly developed in India and some of it in even Middle Asia. A lot of it was an emphasis on repetition and rhythmic singing that then was become culturally relevant. It becomes a social movement, but a lot of it mostly revolves around imparting traditions and concepts onto the next generation. The second section, however, the equivalent of the Middle Ages in Europe, that's where you really had a bit of a boom in terms of the actual tantric as we know it now, where the songs and types of things became a little bit more dispersed and very specific to core areas and traditions, while also becoming more accessible to people as it becomes less of a obtuse tradition and more of a fun thing people can engage in without much restriction, which, by the way, is actually surprisingly uncommon in most human cultures, as religious practices tend to be seclusive and esoteric in their nature. If you just look at some of the Egyptian stuff, for instance, only the high priests were who access to sacred scripts, read them, and obviously interpret them, while the majority of people would otherwise be none the wiser and would simply have to follow the voice of someone that actually had the ability to read and write, thus the obvious slave economy and that kind of stuff. Now, today, we are a bit in a boom in terms of how people approach tantric and yogi stuff, as well as general concepts of singing and how singing influences our lives. A lot of it boils down to very simple concepts just becoming popular, and the concept of vibes and just general spirituality being more acceptable. And that's also, again, uh, let's say, enabled by the access to many different cultures. Now, obviously, the stuff on screen I am covering in partial, but I'm assuming you can read and also listen to me, so like we can cover different things. That's if you're wondering why I'm not reading what's on screen. This is just uh, extra for you if you want to go into it on your own time. So, the scope of the science field and what is the main interests of the scientific field. What are they? Well, we have resonance medicine. We have vibroacoustic rehabilitation and neuromodulation. Now, we're going to explain in more detail what these departments are, but think of them as resonance medicine is high frequency stuff, like microwave level high frequency. Vibroacoustic rehabilitation is like medium frequency, while neuromodulation is experimental music, if you will. It's not even music, technically speaking. You'll get into it. So let's look into some of the core principles we need to understand in order to go forward. Frequency alignment, energy transfer efficiency, and selective targeting and safety. So what is all this about? Essentially, when you work with waves, especially what are waves? Waves are essentially the ability of particles in suspension to interact with each other on a specific pattern. That pattern we call frequency. These are usually calculated in hertz or kilohertz, and the amplitude and strength of this energy is done in decibels. Our human hearing capacity is limited, so we generally try to work with a limited range of things. But just because we can't hear something doesn't mean that it doesn't influence us, especially when it comes to very high frequency or very low frequency stuff. Frequency alignment is important because depending on the types of frequencies and how they interact with each other, you can either have a ripple effect that becomes a more and more intense, or you can have interference, which is essentially disorder. Energy transfer efficiency works in the same vein. It's a question of how you interact with the existing, let's say, microenvironment, and how easy it is to transfer energy through that microenvironment, which again involves some frequency alignment, but also some properties of the liquid or metal, sorry, or solid or air or gas that you're working with. Even plasma technically has frequencies. And obviously, selective targeted safety, you don't want to influence more than you need to. It's just a common knowledge thing when it comes to medical fields and frequency analysis. So, another thing, what is thermal ablation? Surprisingly, I actually recently found out about this on a conference in Toronto. Thermal ablation is essentially microwaving a very small part of your body. Like you are talking about a microscopic size of your body that you can't even notice. The entire point of this procedure is to burn something without actually applying heat there. The waves themselves, being at high frequency in the megahertz, will do that for you. While arch vibration or micronode transduction, this is almost entirely the idea of taking an old person, shaking them very hard, and hoping that their bones wake up. I'm not kidding you, that's basically what it is. So, final principles. I was mentioned there is precision, which means that we don't want to affect more than necessary. But the concept of ways in which ones you use for what reason is very important, right? And for instance, is a schematic of an image guided transducer. Essentially, it is both a method of tracking what's going on, similarly to, let's say, ultrasound, but it's also a method of applying a very specific frequency to an area. And the combination of these things is what enables a lot of therapies, especially in the medical field. So, what are some of the common medical, let's say, applications and what we usually do? So, for instance, we have the high frequency application, as we mentioned before. These work on ablation, works in megahertz. This is essentially where your microwave normally functions, and its entire point is to heat up and remove normally problematic nerve endings. Sometimes you can use it to remove tumors and things of that nature. This is what I said about waking up some bones. So basically, a lot of older people, as well as some trauma victims, have problems with the bone structure and especially with debilitating layers. So, by applying a specific frequency, and in this case, pulses of frequency, you can promote bone growth in an area and rehabilitation without actually stressing the body by making it walk or move. Quite very useful, and it's also applicable to muscles to a lesser extent. This is a similar vein, but it's entirely whole body. The entire point of this is to force a person to essentially be in motion while not doing too much exercise. Again, it's very popular with old people, but generally speaking, anyone with low bone density can benefit from this therapy in particular. This one in particular, binaural beats, is fascinating. Essentially, when you apply two different frequencies of noise to your headsets, your brain will automatically detect that and create an illusion where there is a beat. So essentially, your brain automatically makes the reduction from, for instance, 100, 250 hertz and 260 hertz, and then creates a 10 hertz beat. The whole point of this is that it is a way of interacting internally with some of your brain waves, specifically theta waves. Now, we're not going to go into brainwave concepts. That's a massive discussion of itself, but think of it this way. You are a musician and you need a metronome to guide your system into a direction, essentially tune it. So, creating a metronome through an illusion is one of the ways you can tune up your memory and your understanding of your own body. And then finally, you have tuning fork therapy. This one is the most experimental out of everything in the sense that there is very little proof or show that it actually does anything. However, in theory, just like anything else, tuning forks are a very good way of targeting a specific vibration, especially the ones that we can hear. Assuming you believe in sound therapy in a more spiritual way, this is also a way of approaching what is called to be sacred music or sacred frequencies. Point is, this, although more experimental, does show to have some therapeutic effects. And just for the sake of that, it already has a lot of merit. Now, the expression of it in terms of the biological functions is still very shaky. But that matters very little because we go on to Tantra stuff. So essentially, one of the more interesting things is that every cell in the body, everything in our body works at a specific frequency. As I mentioned, frequencies are just ways of saying you have waves, as in waves are a pattern of movement of particles in suspension. You are mostly water, a little bit of air, and some solids. Obviously, most of your body is perpetually in suspension. So, applying specific frequencies associated with sacred notes or sacred pitches that can be found in the concepts of chakras, specific sounds, as well as application of these sounds, you can match a lot of the same ideas that current modern medicine attempts to do. Like, for instance, a lot of higher frequency stuff enabling you to, uh, let's say, tune up your body to that frequency. A lot of instruments in Indian traditions, such as the bowls, allow for a clean and surprisingly powerful sound that can penetrate your entire body without being too loud. And that part matters particularly because under normal circumstances, especially for instance in a rock concert, if you get hit by 125 decibels, you will feel like you're absolutely deaf. And that's by the nature of having a concert, a lot of random noise. But having a strong sound penetrate you and you even capable of feeling it through your body is surprisingly unique to some of these instruments. And that's one of the reasons they are very popular in yogi traditions as well as general therapy. Now, when it comes to therapy, the problem is that a lot of techniques involve pretty much anything that makes a person feel better. It doesn't matter how or why, but as long as it works and there's a demand for it, there's going to be a type of therapy for it. Some forms of therapy are shown in practice in history to work better than others, but music, surprisingly, well, unsurprisingly actually, is shown to be the most commonly used and the most commonly effective, since most people are very receptive to music. And as I mentioned previously, even if you're deaf, literally, if you're deaf, as long as your body itself can feel the frequency, it will have a strong soothing effect on you. And weirdly enough, I've discovered that tuning forks, as much as they're used in instruments and tuning fork therapy, they are unironically used in certain yogic tradition, in certain Indian therapy sessions, as well as Indian influenced concepts of how these things can play sacred notes and how these can potentially, in frequency, operate on the same level as some of the sacred notes. However, all this as well is not particularly well scientifically supported, but the logic makes sense. If you know at what level your body operates on, you know that engaging in that frequency and enabling it more to make yourself healthier makes sense. The question is how. And we have a few approaches that may be more effective than others. So, one of the more interesting ways is that, let's say, chanting the way we do the kirtans is a way of not only socially engaging but also hitting those specific notes. Our ears and minds are surprisingly good at picking up what feels good. And as long as you play into it and consistently so, you can engage in that balance and that frequency and move your body and mind, as well as your potentially your spirit, into the direction of balance and obviously a more effective life. So, as a conclusion, so that I don't take too much time, let's look at what could probably work best. So we have resonance matched chanting. So the idea would be that you specifically target very interesting frequencies to you and match those frequencies to your voice, to your music, as well as how that frequency affects your body. Now, the thing is, we don't formally know how generalistic frequencies affect us. In fact, there's so little understanding of it. We don't even understand how radio waves or microwaves or 5G energy waves, all that stuff actually affect our bodies. There are many concepts, for instance, that electromagnetic waves of particularly powerful magnets negatively affect human health, or that some people are more sensitive to this stuff than others. But generally speaking, the idea of engaging in music that sounds good, and particularly music that can fully affect your body, not just your ears, can be particularly powerful. Some forms of frequencies are better used on the lower side. For instance, if you struggle with bone density, if you struggle with muscle strength, certain low frequency tools, such as, for instance, the full body version of it, can allow you to strengthen those bonds and empower your body to be stronger despite, for instance, a calcium deficiency or even things like arthritis. And finally, the brainwave stuff is again also exceptionally experimental. There's a lot of things when it comes to music and how it affects our brain that we are still in the middle of discovering. For instance, If you don't know, there's such a thing as an ASMR, which a lot of people claim to be incredibly alluring and interesting to engage with. Or alternatively, as I mentioned, the theta wave stuff is something most people can either enjoy or just not even perceive, but could potentially have long term positive effects on your memory and health. So, in conclusion, in the research that I found, there is an interesting section of science that affects uh, very specific parts of your body for very specific purposes. But the moment you start involving tantric conditions and large scale body effect, you end up finding absolutely nothing of a particular substance, at least in the scientific field. But anecdotally and culturally, there's enough support to believe that, assuming you understand music and frequency, as well as the concept of universal vibrations and frequency well enough, you can actually support the idea formally that you can absolutely blast yourself with good and powerful energy. Now, how you use that energy and how that affects you overall, obviously up to you. Thank you for listening. Here are some of the sources that you may use and will be posted in our little group later. And we will use the next 20 minutes for open discussions, as I prefer massively to talk openly about some of this stuff in a question and answer type format. Thank you very much for listening. Let's go back to our Zoom meeting. So, any questions, any interests, anything piquing your insight into what has been shown so far?
Yeah, can you please share the screen because it's stop sharing the screen. It's crazy. Like I'm looking at myself and I'm talking to the mirror. Kashi, you had a question or what?
Uh, yeah, I had two questions, if that okay to ask. Can I? Hello.
Yeah, he said Q&A, brother. Go ahead, of course.
I'm waiting for him to hear me. I don't think he hears me now. Max, can you hear me?
Sorry, I just wanted to turn off my phone since I was using that to make sure the stream was good. Did I miss a question?
No, no, no. I was waiting for you to sort of handle your thing and then ask it.
All right,
Uh,
go ahead.
can you can you bring up the uh slides for a second?
All
Kind of.
right, just a moment. It's a bit awkward, but I'll do that. Sure. All right, so what are you interested in?
Uh, it was on the tuning fork therapies slide.
Yeah, give me a second. There we go. There we go.
Oh yeah, here. Uh, You mentioned that this is the most experimental, uh, up until today, the most experimental way of sort of associating healing attributions with sound therapy. I was wondering if this is the same as the one mentioned in the slide in the previous slide that you
This
said,
one?
yes, that your brain like automatically tunes if uh, one frequency is lower or higher than the other in your other ear. Would it be the same as doing it with the tuning forks?
Well, yes and no. The long form answer is that they are fundamentally different approaches. Tuning fork therapy often relies on a audible harmony, while theta wave therapy, which is the one you're currently looking at, relies on an inaudible illusion. So let me explain how this works. And by the way, if you have a very good earphones or Bluetooth devices. You can actually go on YouTube and find some of these videos just to experiment with this, and it's absolutely interesting. So theta wave therapy creates an active illusion either on a gamma or theta wavelength. And the concept is that the illusion itself represents the internal metronome of your mind, which then represents how in tune you are with your ability to focus, generate memories, and sleep. This is not fully proven, but there is more and more, let's say, resources showing that it is at least to some extent correlated with all of these factors, and the actual procedure, if nothing else, is very fun. I'm not sure how effective it is overall because again, all of these things are mostly anecdotal and not fully proven, but it is an interesting little thing. Well, tuning fork therapy, although could technically be used in the same concept, they are not as accurate. Tuning forks work on a much lower frequency, or more specifically, on a much lower um, accuracy of frequency than, for instance, your headphones can. And moreover, you cannot shove a tuning fork into your own ear. So you have to operate on a distance and with a decent amount of air and ambient noise being potentially a problem with the uh, influence. However, tuning fork therapies, generally speaking, don't aim to do that. What they aim to do is use harmony and sacred notes to affect your whole body and your mind as well. So there, the people are more trying to do some pseudo medicine with these things, or they're just musically gifted and really like the harmony sounds themselves, which in of itself is absolutely harmless as well. So the approach is different, but the idea of frequencies and how they affect you is, let's say, applicable similarly in both cases, just that the endpoint is different. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. That was very clear. And
All right.
there's also one more if we have time, I would like to also ask that one too.
Yeah, go ahead. We have time.
Yeah, so towards the end you mentioned that you can choose a frequency. Yeah, it was this slide. You can choose a frequency and you can apply that to your kirtan singing.
Hmm.
That would, well, subsequently affect you in positive or negative way, depends on sort of the use that you take out of it. How can you do that? How can you bring very specific frequency to your singing voice and be sure that is accurate to work?
Okay, so this one is very interesting. Have you ever seen a spectrometer?
No, I haven't.
Okay, so this is again very recent news to myself as I am delving into audio processing technology because of a different thing going on in my life. But a spectrometer is essentially a graph that represents what's going on. Actually, let me show you. Uh, Give me a second. Oh, as long as the actual internet works. Let me moment. Let me see if I can show you. Spectrometer. So, not quite. I think I'm misselling it, but I'll come back to you with a picture for this one in a moment. But essentially, imagine a graph in your mind. On one side, you have this. Sorry, you have hertz. On the bottom, you have time, and then you have the color representing the decibels, which is the strength or the amplitude. And the spectrometer, oh yeah, of course, the spectrometer is the light-based one. Sorry, I need to rearrange my memory. There is a different one specifically for audio frequencies, but you can look at it, look it up. And that graph represents the distribution of sounds that you're working with. Depending on, let's say the method you analyze sound with, you have multiple ways of looking at it. In the slides, you saw a graph like this, right? That one is frequency based. It is not the same. Nirmal, by chance, do you know what I'm talking about, right? When we are looking at sound, the most in-depth analysis we can have is like uh, hertz over time with intensity being shown with color. You know what that is, right?
I'm not particularly aware, but this is only one dimension to look at it. You take, because Hertz is the domain of physics, so what's the specific name? Probably there like must be a domain of science that like concerns with sound and frequency. What would the name be? Physics? Because this is only one dimension. Because if you're talking Kirtan, this is a domain of spiritual practice, culture, history, therapy is another thing. So it's like a multidisciplinary thing that's happening here, guys.
Yes.
And I'm least concerned with this. So Max, you know better about the physics aspect of it in terms of hertz, in terms of frequency. So that I
Yeah,
would.
give me a moment. I'm trying to find it because the website has just crashed, the one that I used to figure that one out just a few moments ago. But I'll find it to you for you. But basically, what I'm saying, I'm gonna say it right now, is that all devices in your life, especially your phone, well, okay, not all devices. Your phone has multiple ways of tracking the frequencies and amplitudes you use. So you can download an app, talking to it, singing to it, use a musical instrument, and it will be able to record the music in a way you can then download the file and look at the distribution of the frequencies and amplitudes. The less ambient noise you have, the more accurate you can judge what frequency you're operating on overall. Something people don't fully understand normally is that you don't have a specific frequency under normal circumstances. Your brain does a very weird thing when it comes to sound. And this is something that is quite relevant for comprehension. You take the full spectrum of sound that you can hear, and you actually cut it into ribbons. You have focus sections. You are more perceptible to, for instance, small changes and less perceptible into large scale changes. And when you cut it down into ribbons, you then are able to figure out what matters. And there is actually a name for this. In fact, let me check it on my phone. It should be there. And the whole point is that you can look at your frequency distribution and know on which level your voice operates on mostly. In music, there are Italian terms for how high or how low your voice can go. But beyond that, there is obviously more straightforward ways of explaining frequency. Yeah, I don't think I have here anymore. But let me look, let me look. Why is this thing absolutely... Yeah. Ah, man, this is gonna bother me so much. I don't remember how it's called. Graph spectrum. Spectrum. Sorry, my memory is not ideal at the moment. Damn. Oh well. I'll post it in the group chat if the website starts working again, which I hope it does. But yes, hopefully that answers part of your question. But basically, almost every phone has a bunch of apps that have tuning software that you can use for musical instruments or for your voice, as well as analysis software that will allow you to look into the exact hertz and the ranges you work with. Do not be surprised to know that uh, human hearing actually has a very specific range. Let me check it up. Human hearing range should be, yeah, from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz. For reference sake, microwaves work at 300 kilohertz. So they're way, way, way above anything you can hear. And something you also need to be aware of, it's logarithmic. Almost every scale we have for sound and music is more sensitive to small changes and less sensitive to large scale changes. So for instance, there's a much larger difference between 70 decibels and 60 decibels compared to 40 decibels and 30 decibels. That's kind of how this was meant to be operated with. Oof. Yeah, but as you can see, I still have yet to fully master a lot of this stuff since I'm still very new to a lot of these concepts.
Thank you. Thanks for answering. That was really interesting. Especially for me, that I'm getting into music, anything really related to sounds just fascinates me, especially when it gets to things that I haven't explored yet. So thank you for the presentation and for your response.
No problem. My pleasure. Uh, do you have anything to say, Nirmal, perhaps?
Well, I appreciate it seems to be the okay, so the science or the physics behind it, right? By the way, is there another name of the
Okay.
component?
Yes, I found. By the way, to answer your question, I found the thing and how it's called. It's called a Mel spectrogram. So I'll write it in chat so that you know what to look for. That is the human frequency analysis method. So give me a second.
So an overview from the perspective of physics and science is good. Not obviously, but there could be more further research done and presented on what Kirtan is. And you did a good overview historically, though I don't know about your sources about history. It seems to be from Wikipedia, or what was
Yeah,
your...
mostly I didn't have all that much time to like delve deep into the history of Kirtan.
Yeah, fair.
So if you want to do a more in-depth like cultural analysis, obviously that's gonna be amazing.
Yeah, I mean that's a good start. Like it's a big topic, but anyways, it's like I would say in terms of like looking at it as physics, I appreciate that. I don't have that expert knowledge in it, so that's good. That was a good perspective. Like for further questions, further research questions, I would say, what are the what are like the core connections of what are the core concepts that are related to Kirtan in terms of when you go into tantric philosophy, we're talking about, yes, vibration, but also like vowels and how each vowel has a certain vibration associated with it and supposedly a color. And when it comes to mantra chanting, there are different mantras, and mantras depending on the source where they come from. Usually they come from the guru or the ancient yogis and passed down from one teacher to another and then to disciples. And basically different dimensions of sounds, like the interconnection between language, letter, and the sound, and the effects that they make, and maybe the research into what kind of branches of science study them, and then the connection of this history of music therapy or the therapy of sound and other modalities. But you've done a good preliminary, look survey into it. Big topic. And I think next week, if I have time to prepare the other part of looking in Kirtan, yeah, can have another angle to look at it. But good. I would
Oh,
say one thing is Theory is good, all of this is good, but Kirtan is largely an experiential practice unless you really do it and experience it and you get phenomenological experience, meaning like feel it in your body, feel it in your mind, and then of course have some researcher like interview you qualitatively, what was your experience, this and that, or you can document that. That would be an interesting further research into that. But I think it starts with you, a person who like applies all of this, like takes the mantra, takes that, goes into the field, does the work, documents what they feel, say do it for like a month or two or, or three times. Like that's what I did at the University of Toronto. I actually documented my experiences. I did Kirtan practice and specifically documented my feelings, my emotions, my thoughts, emotional states. I already said that after the practice of Kirtan. And it was quite fascinating. I can pull up the journal I was doing, but usually like it's transitioning from one state of emotional state in consciousness state into another, like feeling different in your body, like feeling the tension go away, like Max you're saying, it's like provokes stress reduction. Yeah, it does real stuff, but more systematic research needs to be done on this, on Kirtan.
Yes, and the one of the reasons why I'm very curious about this is because I, for instance, don't know what the difference would be between singing kirtan or just going to a karaoke. Uh, to me, they feel equivalent, at least on the surface level, because I'm just don't know enough. But why not? Why
But the
not
thing,
go and actually compare qualitatively in a qualitative study about karaoke versus tantric singing and see who wins out on the best feeling at the end of the day. I personally would very much enjoy that participating in that kind of study over a month. You can be up for it if you want.
well, once I have more time on my hands, we can design. I have experience to how to design qualitative study, research study. We can do that, and without any commission, just do our own thing.
Wake me up inside.
Yeah,
Oh man, I just can envision it. But
Yeah.
yes, thank you very much
it's
for
gonna be
listening.
big. It's gonna be huge.
It's gonna be huge.
Right.
Oh man.
We're approaching 10 p.m. and I have to wake up at like 4:45. So
Oh, now you're the one complaining compared to last time. Okay, yeah,
my
I
time
see
change.
how it is. I see how it is. Okay,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
but yeah, I won't stop anyone. Thank you very much for listening. This was a very big joy for me to do these presentations, and hopefully there will be more people. Hopefully Jeff Besh will join in next time. Hopefully he's still alive. Otherwise, have a good night. I'm out. Thank you.
Yeah. I don't mean to cut you off, but if you want to stay and continue asking questions, you're welcome to. It's just I'm not able to go past this limit.
Yeah, perfect. So have a good night, Nikolai, or